You woke up in the dark because your father was shaking you. It was 4 in the morning. Your body ached from yesterday's work, but that didn't matter. The mill waited for no one. You pulled on the same clothes you'd worn for 3 months, stiff with dirt and sweat. Your shoes had holes in them. Your feet were bleeding, but you'd learned to ignore it. You were 7 years old. You'd been working at the cotton mill for 8 months, ever since your mother died and your father couldn't afford to feed you without your wages. You walked through the freezing pre-dawn darkness, your hand in your father's, toward the factory that would consume the next 14 hours of your life. The noise hit you before you even entered. The deafening roar of hundreds of machines running simultaneously. You stepped inside and the overseer pointed you to your station. A massive spinning machine with parts moving so fast you could barely see them. Your job was to crawl underneath while it was running and collect the cotton threads that fell through. One mistake, one moment of slowness, and the machine would catch your hair or your clothing and pull you in. You'd seen it happen to other children. Watched them get mangled by machinery that didn't stop even when they were screaming. This was childhood in the 1800s. Not learning or playing or growing. Just working until your body gave out. Just surviving one more day in a world that saw you as a piece of equipment, valuable only for the labor you could provide before you broke. The 1800s, particularly in industrializing Britain and America, saw childhood redefined as a period of economic utility rather than development. For poor and working-class children, there was no concept of childhood as we understand it today. No schooling, no play, no protection from adult responsibilities and dangers. Children as young as 4 or 5 were put to work, in factories, in mines, on farms, in domestic service. Anywhere their small bodies and cheap labor could be exploited for profit. The Industrial Revolution created an insatiable demand for workers, and children were perfect employees from an owner's perspective. They could be paid a fraction of adult wages. They could fit into spaces adults couldn't. They were less likely to organize or complain. And if they were injured or killed, they were easily replaced. Families were so desperately poor that they had no choice but to send their children to work. A child's wages, minimal as they were, often meant the difference between the family eating or starving. So children worked 12, 14, 16 hours a day, 6 or 7 days a week, in conditions that maimed and killed them regularly. And society accepted this as normal, as necessary, as the natural order of an industrial economy. Childhood wasn't a time of innocence to be protected. It was a resource to be extracted. Emma Clark was 7 when she started working in a textile mill in Manchester. Her family lived in a 2-room tenement with 5 other families. Her father worked in the same mill, but his wages weren't enough. Her mother was pregnant with her 6th child, sick constantly, unable to work. Emma had 3 younger siblings who needed food, so Emma went to work. The mill owner hired children specifically because they were cheap and could perform tasks adults couldn't. Emma's job was piecing. She worked barefoot on a stone floor, moving between the spinning machines to tie together broken threads. The machines never stopped. You had to reach in while they were running, tie the threads with your small fingers, and pull your hands back before the machinery caught them. Emma was fast. She had to be. Slow meant losing fingers. She de-started on her first day with all 10 fingers. By the end of her first month, she'd lost the tip of her left index finger when she wasn't quick enough. The machine had caught it and torn it off before she could pull away. The overseer had wrapped it in a dirty rag and sent her back to work within an hour. No doctor, no time to heal, just back to the same machine that had mutilated her, because stopping work meant losing wages, and losing wages meant her family didn't eat. The hours were inhuman. Emma woke at 4:30, walked to the mill in the dark, and started work at 5. She worked until noon, got a 15-minute break to eat whatever stale bread or thin gruel her mother had packed, then worked until 8 at night. 15 hours. Standing the entire time because sitting meant being beaten by the overseer. Moving constantly because the machines demanded it. Breathing air so thick with cotton dust that she coughed constantly. Her lungs were filling with fibers, slowly suffocating her from the inside. By the time she was 9, she had chronic lung disease. Every breath hurt. Every cough brought up blood-tinged phlegm, but she kept working because she had no choice. The alternative was her family starving. The mill was deafening. The noise of hundreds of machines running simultaneously was so loud you couldn't hear someone shouting next to you. Emma's hearing was permanently damaged within 6 months. By age 8, she was partially deaf. The overseer communicated through gestures and beatings. If you didn't understand what he wanted, he'd hit you until you figured it out. Emma learned to read his body language, to anticipate his demands, to make herself as invisible as possible while still doing her work. There was no childhood left in Emma. No games, no laughter, no learning. She couldn't read, couldn't write, couldn't do arithmetic beyond counting the pennies she was paid each week. Her entire existence was the mill. Wake up, work, go home, sleep, repeat. 7 days a week except Sunday, when she was allowed to rest but was usually too exhausted to do anything except sleep. Her body was breaking down systematically. The lung disease, the hearing loss, the missing fingertip. Chronic pain in her feet and legs from standing on hard stone for 15 hours daily. Malnutrition because most of her wages went to her family and she ate whatever scraps were left. By the time she was 10, she looked 6, stunted, gaunt, old before she'd ever had a chance to be young, and the mill owners didn't care. They had hundreds of children like Emma. If one collapsed or died or became too damaged to work, there were 10 more waiting to take the position. Children were disposable, replaceable, valued only for the profit their labor generated. If you were Emma, 7 years old when you started and already broken by age 10, your body failing, your childhood stolen, what would have kept you going? Would you have found any joy in life? Or would you have just existed day after day until your body gave out completely? Injury was constant in the mills and factories. Children lost fingers, hands, arms to machinery. They were scalped when their hair got caught in spinning equipment. They were crushed between gears or under falling equipment. The factories were death traps and children were the most vulnerable. Emma watched a girl named Mary get caught in a spinning machine when Emma was 8. Mary was 9, had been working at the mill for 2 years. She leaned in to tie a thread and her hair got caught. The machine pulled her in. She screamed. The sound cut off almost immediately as the machinery crushed her skull. The machine didn't stop. The overseer had to shut it down manually to extract her body. It took 20 minutes. The other children, including Emma, were ordered to keep working, to not look, to not react. Mary's body was removed. The machine was cleaned. A new girl started in Mary's position the next day. The mill owner paid Mary's family 10 shillings as compensation for her death, less than a month's wages. That's what a child's life was worth, 10 shillings and a quick burial in an unmarked grave. But here's what makes childhood in the 1800s even more horrific. The system was designed by people who had childhoods themselves, who knew what childhood could be. The factory owners, the politicians who refused to pass labor laws, the businessmen who profited from child labor, they all had children of their own. Children who went to school, who played, who were protected and nurtured. They knew childhood could be a time of development and safety. They just didn't think working-class children deserved that. The exploitation was deliberate, calculated. They extracted maximum profit from child labor while ensuring their own children never experienced anything remotely similar. The hypocrisy was staggering. They'd attend church on Sunday and hear sermons about loving children, about protecting the innocent. Then they'd go back to their factories on Monday and work those same children to death. The cognitive dissonance didn't seem to bother them. They'd convinced themselves that poor children were different, that they needed hard work to build character. That factory labor was actually good for them, teaching discipline and responsibility. These were lies they told themselves to justify the exploitation, and society accepted those lies because acknowledging the truth would have required systemic change, would have required wealthy people to sacrifice profit for children's welfare. And that was too much to ask. Think about what childhood means today. School, play, protection from adult responsibilities, time to grow and learn and just be a child. Now imagine that stripped away at age 5 or 6 and replaced with industrial labor that destroys your body. Imagine never learning to read, never playing a game, never having a single day where you weren't working or recovering from work. That was normal for millions of children. Could you have survived it? Would you have wanted to? Most children who worked in factories didn't reach adulthood. They died from accidents, from disease, from bodies that simply gave out under the strain. Emma lasted until she was 12. Her lungs had deteriorated to the point where she could barely breathe. She coughed constantly, bringing up blood. Her body had stopped growing. She was the size of an 8-year-old skeletal with skin stretched tight over bones. The mill owner told her she was no longer productive enough to justify her wages. She was fired, turned out with no compensation, no support, nothing. She de-worked for 5 years, destroyed her body for the mill's profit, and was discarded the moment she couldn't keep up. Emma tried to find other work. No one would hire her. She was too sick, too weak, too obviously dying. She ended up begging on the streets. Her family couldn't support her. They had younger children who'd taken her place at the mill. Emma was just another burden they couldn't afford. She slept in doorways and alleys, begged for food, slowly starved while her lungs continued to deteriorate. Emma died on a winter morning, curled up in an alley behind a bakery. She was 12 years old. Her body was found by a shopkeeper who called for someone to remove it. She was taken to the city morgue, recorded as an unidentified child, and buried in a pauper's grave. No family claimed her. No one attended her burial. She was just another dead child in a city full of them. Her 5 years of labor had generated profit for the mill owner, had helped feed her family for a time, had contributed to the industrial growth that historians celebrate, but it had given Emma nothing. No education, no health, no future, just suffering and an early death. This was childhood in the 1800s for the poor. This was what working-class children's lives were worth. 5 years of exploitation followed by abandonment and death. The system continued for decades. Reformers eventually pushed for child labor laws, but they came slowly and were weakly enforced. Children continued working in factories well into the late 1800s in Britain and into the early 1900s in America. The improvements were incremental, slight reductions in hours, age restrictions that were easily circumvented, safety regulations that owners ignored. It took generations to establish the idea that children deserved protection from industrial labor. And even then, the changes came only because organized labor and progressive reformers fought for them against fierce opposition from business interests. The factory owners didn't suddenly develop consciences. They were forced to stop exploiting children by laws and social pressure, and they resisted every step of the way, arguing that restricting child labor would hurt the economy, that it would harm families who needed the wages, that children benefited from hard work. The same lies, recycled over and over to justify continuing the exploitation as long as possible. Even after child labor was eventually restricted in industrialized nations, the practice didn't end. It just moved to other countries, to less regulated industries. Today, millions of children still work in conditions similar to what Emma experienced, in factories, in mines, in fields. The mechanisms have evolved, but the fundamental calculation remains the same. Children's bodies are cheap labor. Their suffering is profitable. And as long as profit matters more than children's welfare, the exploitation continues. Emma died in 1855, but children are dying now in the 21st century from the same causes: overwork, malnutrition, injury, disease. The Industrial Revolution didn't create child labor. It industrialized it, made it more efficient, more profitable, more deadly. And we've never fully stopped. We've just moved it out of sight, hidden it in supply chains and developing countries and places where consumers don't have to think about it. Emma's childhood was stolen so factory owners could profit. Children's childhoods are still being stolen today for the same reason. The faces change. The locations change. The justifications evolve. But the crime remains the same: the deliberate destruction of children for economic gain. And until we acknowledge that, until we decide that no product is worth a child's suffering, the Emma Clarks of the world will keep dying, keep being used up and thrown away, keep proving that when we measure childhood against profit, profit wins, every time. That's the real history of childhood in the 1800s. Not innocence, not protection, just exploitation. Just small bodies fed into machines until they broke. Just the knowledge that society valued economic growth more than children's lives. And that calculation, that choice to prioritize profit over people, is still being made today. Still destroying childhoods. Still proving that we've learned nothing from history except how to hide the suffering better.